So we are back for another video, and we kind of discussed a lot of these things about serotonin, melatonin, dopamine, and we wanted to touch up on gut health, or more precisely, intricacies of proper gut function. And this comes also from just a more recent experiment I did as well. I feel like to me it came by my friend describing how I approach my nutrition. And he was like, dude, you're trying to fuel Ferrari whilst everyone else is trying to fuel their Fiat 500. The oil that's needed for different vehicle, even though they look and do the same job, because you work at completely different capacity, you need higher level nutrition to maintain that health and performance. So maybe you can open up and talk about an overview of digestive system and maybe role of nutrients and what actually matters, or do we bypass it all and just count and aim for calories? What's happening there? Because we are focusing on proper gut function, which means how do we fuel ourselves to maintain health and mental clarity?
Yeah. So when it comes to that, right, you have to understand that your gut, actually, its first role is not digestion. Unlike, that's something that a lot of people don't understand. Your gut's first role is actually the same role as your skin. It's to keep things out that shouldn't be in your bloodstream. And in fact, your gut is where your bloodstream can meet the outside world. So it's a very important battleground, if you want to put it that way, where a battle is fought to ensure that you aren't consistently getting sick, no matter really what you eat, right? Think of it this way, there's lots of studies out there where, people that are kept hyper sterile, right? Like they clean everything and all of that. They show that they don't have as good as an immune system compared to, especially children, studies with children that are, left to their own devices and go outside and eat dirt or whatever, right? And get their hands dirty and eat food and all of that. The reason for that is because the gut is doing this specific thing. It is controlling your immune system first, and then digestion happens later, right? So let's talk a little bit about that, right? Because let's put it this way. I don't care how good of food you eat, like the quality of food. If your immune system is off and your gut function is off, that food won't digest. And the reason for that is because if the gut senses that there is a problem in the outside world with anything that you put into your mouth and into the digestive tract, it's not going to digest it because it's trying to keep it out of your bloodstream, right? So this is where you can end up with problems like, hey, I eat good, right? I eat whole foods, but my gut just doesn't like that and I get diarrhea. That's a sign that your immune system is essentially being overprogrammed or overreacting to anything that comes in, because the gut's first function is to keep things out. It's not to digest things. Digestion happens when there's a coordination between the skin, the brain, and the gut. Everybody knows that there's a brain-gut axis, right? Like you can Google that, right? There's the vagus nerve that connects the brain directly to your gut. But we've also, me and you, have talked about this wireless communication system between the skin and the brain. The skin and the brain are the same tissue as a fetus, and then they get pulled apart while you're developing in the placenta. And when that happens, that means that your skin now has atoms that are intertwined or entangled, quantum entangled with atoms in your brain. That means your skin wirelessly communicates to your brain. And we know this from studies on blind people. Blind people can actually tell when there's a different type of light hitting their skin, even though they actually can't see. And the reason is because the skin wirelessly communicates with their brain. Right. And so there's a three-way communication system. The skin is telling the brain what is happening in the outside world. And then the brain is telling the gut what to expect to come in. Right. So if it doesn't match up, the gut has a head start, on making sure that that shit stays out. Right. Like, well, for example, and this is common in people in their 20s and 30s as they spend way more time indoors and they live in a northern environment, and it doesn't even have to be a northern environment. You just don't interact with sunlight. We've talked about this before, where the skin is interpreting, hey, there's no UV light out. There's very little infrared light out. It must be winter. And then you feed it a bunch of bananas and fruits and all kinds of things, and high sunlight foods that only grow in high sunlight, and you eventually start to get digestive upset. Like you don't digest things well. You start to get diarrhea easily, or bloating and gas and all kinds of
Could
things
you
like
even
that.
go as far as
And
develop an allergy?
yeah, absolutely. You would be diagnosed, like, let's put it this way. You would act like you have an allergy, but when you go get tested, it's nothing's showing up, right? Because it's not a real allergy, but all the symptoms are the same, right? And so yeah, you would interpret it as I have a food allergy of some kind. And the reason is because the communication is off. The skin is telling the brain, hey, these types of foods, right? Because again, because you put it in your mouth doesn't mean that it's a food,
Mm.
right? Like people have to understand that just because you put it in your mouth doesn't mean that it's a food. The brain and the body and the gut are trying to figure that out. And they're coordinating with each other to make sure, oh, this is an acceptable thing that we can try to digest, right? Because digestion means incorporating it into the bloodstream. And if you have foreign substances getting into your bloodstream, that's a really bad thing. So, number one, that is the gut's first job, is to make sure that things that are supposed to stay out stay out. Now, in terms of food and nutrients and things of that nature that will allow that, things like gelatin type products, and then I don't mean like jello, I mean like gelatin coming from bones and sinew and things of that nature, actually stews, things of that, those would be very helpful for the gut lining, right? The gut lining, right? So let's put it this way. How does digestion happen? The gut lining is permeable, and it's actually more permeable in humans than other animals. The reason for that is because we are designed to uptake nutrients much more efficiently than other animals. Our digestive tract is actually shortened compared to our nearest relative, chimpanzees. It's not nearly as long. And that means that we have more gut permeability so that we can uptake more nutrients than they can. So we get to eat less food and get more out of it. With that comes a consequence, right? The consequence is now you're more sensitive to letting things into the bloodstream. And so your body has essentially developed something called the GULT. The GULT, or gut-associated lymphoid tissue, is what it's called. And I'll bring up an image here in a minute. And the gut-associated lymphoid tissue is a tissue that's literally right behind your gut. And that's why it's called gut-associated lymphoid tissue. And that particular thing, let me share this right here. Here is a broken down version of it right here, right? And so there is B cells and T cells in here, right? So there is an area for T cells and there is an area for B cells. And these are behind a lining that's behind your gut. And that's essentially what your immune system is doing at the gut level. If there's anything that comes in that's foreign, the T cells are not only just there ready to do their job and kill any viruses and bacteria that should be not in your body. They are also that, if you come over here to your immune system chart, the GULT is actually where T cells get matured, right? So what does that mean, right? Most people would interpret that as, oh, well, that's where they do their final growing or whatever. And that's not actually what's happening when it says matured. Matured means they've received their instructions for the day. And those instructions are light instructions, right? Like I mentioned earlier, right? Your skin is communicating with your brain by interpreting what type of light is interacting with it. And your gut also has that light that should be interacting with it, mainly infrared light. And the reason why it's mainly infrared light is because of this little diagram right here, right? Ultraviolet light, UVC, UVB, and UVA, which are the things that are going to tan, they can only penetrate the epidermis and the dermis, right? If you look right, only the epidermis, right? If you look over here. And then there's visible light, violet and red, and then infrared light. And you notice right here where it says IRA or infrared, it penetrates the most. It can actually penetrate up to a foot into the body. So the way that there's a coordination effect is UVA or UV light in general tunes the skin to how many B cells are matured, because most B cells are at the skin level. And infrared light tunes the gut system to mature the T cells. And that's essentially just giving them the instructions of what is the environment outside, right? What is actually outside of the body. And then it can coordinate with the brain to go, okay, there's a high sunlight environment outside that we should be able to eat just about anything because everything will be able to grow. And then when there's a low sunlight environment, what you will find is there is no UV stimulation on the skin. So B cells get tuned differently. And then there is less infrared. And so T cells will get tuned differently. Essentially, the amount of sunlight and the type of sunlight that you get changes your immune system, which will also change the digestive system because of where the immune system is located, right? Those are crucial points to understand, that your immune system and your gut are very, very, very intertwined. And when the immune system goes haywire, or when the digestive system goes haywire, one of the crucial things to understand is now there's a feedback mechanism to the brain. In other words, you can get brain fog, you can get poor quality of thinking, because the gut will send neurotransmitter signals to the brain through the neurotransmitters that get made in the gut, telling it there's something going wrong, right? So the production of serotonin might go down. So the production of dopamine will go down. That's actually probably the first thing that happens, is the production of dopamine goes down in the gut, and it doesn't go through the vagus nerve nearly as much. Now you have brain fog and can't follow cognitive thought, right? Like you actually can't follow complex problems anymore, because dopamine is a pattern recognition neurotransmitter. So that is actually something that everybody needs to address first before you start thinking of like the types of food that you eat, right? Is, are you getting the proper signaling to your skin and your gut and your brain at the same time? And in terms of signaling at the brain, we're talking about the eyes, right? Your eyes are your brain. They're directly connected. And so those three things need to be coherent, meaning if you're eating high sunlight foods, you better be experiencing high sunlight environments. If you're not eating high sunlight foods, then it's okay to have a low sunlight environment. Now, this can be upregulated and downregulated acutely, right? Like if you literally go ahead.
This almost explains something that I have observed, where a lot of people who have very high sleep score, 80s, 90s, and they still have brain fog. And then I talk to them and they're like, never spend any time outside at all. But they're like, yeah, but I sleep 8-9 hours and my REM sleep is great, my deep sleep is great. And I'm like, yeah, but I talk to you, it's like talking to a wall. I can clearly see that you're not functioning well. Like,
yeah,
so.
yeah. And then these types of people, if this goes on long enough, this is where autoimmunity comes in, right? What is autoimmunity? It is when your immune system no longer can tell what is domestic, right? What's actually inside of your body that's okay, and what's outside of the body, right? And it's not okay. It's because the disconnect of the environment has happened. You have officially not interacted with the environment for a long enough period of time that now the gut and the B cells in your skin and the T cells in your gut no longer can tell what's foreign and what's domestic. And that's because there's a disassociation with the environment outside, because the job of the immune system is to clearly understand what is outside of the body and what is inside of the body. But if there is no light stimulation to tell the skin how to tune the B cells, and there's no infrared stimulation to tell the gut how to tune the T cells, well, it's never going to actually know what's outside and what's inside. This is how autoimmunity starts. And it can actually start transgenerationally, meaning if the mother is not interacting with the environment, she's tuning the immune system of the child growing inside of her and the eggs growing inside of her. So you can be born with an autoimmunity, and it's not genetic, it's environmental, because the mother passes down the information to the child because that's how the system works. Your body is always proactive, everybody's body. It's never reactive. Like that's a big misconception in science, is that, oh, there's a cause and there's an effect. No, 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 no. There's a probability equation of what comes next, because your body's always trying to survive tomorrow, right? When you train today hard as hell, what is it doing? Is it trying to fix what happened today? Well, there's a little bit of that going on, but what it's really doing is preparing for another onslaught the next time that happens, right? It's always in a proactive manner, and people get too hung up on the, oh, what happened right now and what is it doing right now? And then stop understanding that, oh, all of these things are going to be amplified to prevent something in the future or counteract something in the future, right? And so there is always a probability and timing related thing going on.
So what are the most common things that you observe for gut imbalances? You know, like the most obvious probably would be going for solid number two, which so many people overlook. And it's, to me, it blows my mind that so few people understand that gut health starts with your visit to toilet. It's like, oh, I've not been to toilet for 3 days, or I've not had solid poop for 3 months or 3 years. And I'm like, wow. And you didn't think it's not normal? So what are other takeaways? What can tell you that
that one is, so I'll tell you this. That one is the one that's going to tell you right here, right now, if something's going on, right? So you're 100% right. And that's the Bristol stool scale, right? Like whether, are you constipated or are you having diarrhea? It should be a number 5, which is, a solid sausage, right? I'm not trying to get too graphic. It's just, it should be that way, right? It should be that way. If it is off, it tells you acutely what has happened in the last 48 hours, right? So I for sure use that because that tells us what's happening right here, right now. I've even seen this, right? I've seen people where they literally leave their home environment, right? They work from home. I'm dealing with them at their home and they're having problems with digestion. They leave their environment, go on a little vacation, take off for a weekend, and their gut, stool, their defecation changes the very next day. The very next day that they left that environment, it changes for the positive. And I go, okay, this is a problem of where you're at. And they go, how do you know? I'm like, because the moment you left it, it changed. So I will say this, that one is by far the most reactive, meaning it happens very quick and it changes towards positive or negative almost immediately within a 24-hour period, if the problem is an environmental problem. So I will say that I use that a lot. And it's free. I mean, just tell me what it looks like, right? Like tell me what happened when you went to the bathroom in the morning and we can immediately start looking at that. So I will say that that is by far the most underrated by a long ways. Now, once you're trying to figure it out, right? Once you've established that there's a problem and, you do some certain things, you leave an environment or you change what you're eating or whatever, and nothing's really fixing it. Then there are things like stool sampling that will definitely tell you, if there's more or less bacteria than there should be, if there's bad bacteria or not, and things of that nature. And then you can start looking into other things like, maybe there's mold where you live and things of that nature, if there are those types of things. But here is another concept that a lot of people don't understand. And I'm going to show you something real quick here. Let me see.
What about being bloated and those kind of things?
Yeah, those same type of issue. So they may be being caused by the same, like having diarrhea and bloating and things of that nature may be being caused by the same thing. So you could have bloating and not diarrhea, and it could be being caused by the same thing. Right. It will really depend on the bacteria that you have, right, and don't have. And so everybody's going to be a little bit different on how they react. But this is something that's very, very important. Okay. Melanin is a huge thing in terms of smooth muscle cells, right? So melanin and all kinds of sphincters and muscle cells and even muscles inside the gut have things that or not things, but like your sphincters, right? So you have a sphincter in your esophagus, you have a sphincter at the bottom of your stomach, you have a sphincter that connects your small intestine to your large intestine, right? And so What do these what's the job of these sphincters? The sphincters themselves are doors, essentially, right? They are doors that are supposed to remain closed and only open under certain circumstances. Well, those are muscles, right? What do we know about muscles? Muscles need electricity to function, meaning if I want to close my fist, I need to send an electrical current to my fist to close it. And if I relax that electrical charge, my fist opens. Sphincters work the opposite. There's always an electrical charge. That's what keeps them closed. And then if the electrical charge dissipates, they open back up. But they should always have an electrical charge. What keeps the electrical charge there? Melanin. That's why your sphincters, all of them, have a different color than the rest of the skin around it, right? Your lips are a different color. Your lips on your butt are a different color. When you get a scope, doctors will notice the color of your sphincters. They don't really know. They note the color, but they don't know what they're looking at. They do note, hey, it's a different color, right? It's more red, more inflamed, blah, 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 all of these things, but it is a different color. Melanin is what's giving it a different color. The more melanin you have in a specific muscle, the more potential electrical charge it will have. So that's why I'm bringing up this picture here. Melanin is everywhere because it provides electrical charge to certain systems, and some systems like sphincters and smooth muscles require more electrical charge than others. Why am I saying this? Because there's a big thing with gut health these days about SIBO and celiac, or not celiac. What's the other? Not the SIBO, and then there's another one. I'm spacing on the name, but I'll think about it. But there's a couple bacterial overgrowth type digestive issues that a lot of people, especially women, are like, oh, I'm getting tested for SIBO, or I'm getting tested for I keep wanting to say celiac disease, but that's not the one that I'm talking about. There's another one. I'll when I think of it, I'll say it. But there's a couple overgrowth bacterial things. That's a sphincter problem, right? So there's bacteria in different parts of your intestines, right? There's bacteria in the large intestine that should not be in the small intestine. There's bacteria in the small intestine that should not be in the stomach. And there's a sphincter at each part. If you start demyelinating, meaning there isn't enough melanin being restored into these sphincters, guess what's going to happen? It's going to open up. It's going to open up slightly, right? Not a lot, but it's going to open up slightly. So now guess what will happen? Bacteria that should have stayed in your lower intestine now starts to migrate to the upper intestine. Bacteria that should have stayed in the small intestine starts to migrate into the stomach. Acid that should stay in the stomach starts to migrate up into the esophagus. So when people start telling me, oh, I have to take Pepcid AC all the time, well, that tells me that there is a sphincter problem at the esophageal sphincter. Oh, I have SIBO. That means that my functional medicine doctor tested me, or I went and got a stool sample or whatever, and there is foreign bacteria in my small intestine that should be in the large intestine. I'm like, well, that's a sphincter problem. So you're not going to fix that with food. You're not going to fix that with antibiotics. You're going to kill off some bacteria with the biotic, but you're not fixing the problem. What's the problem? The problem is the door, the sphincter itself. How do you fix that? You create enough melanin on your surfaces and enough darkness at night for the melanin to migrate internally to all of these spots, right? So just going back to this picture.
So when you speak about darkness at night, it's not just putting a eye mask on, it's about actually blacking out your room, right? And this
blacking out your room and not
is this concept
and not
similar
having
to
Wi-Fi on.
Is this similar to Crohn's disease and things like that as well?
Yes, because Crohn's disease will be an immune system response, right? So an immune system
Because
response
what I
has
have
to do
noticed that people who have Crohn's disease, they are usually quite pale.
Yep. So it tells me a lot, right? And we said this a long time ago, like a couple of years ago. Your ability to tan will tell you a lot about health outcomes in the future. If you all of a sudden notice, I can't get a tan anymore like I used to when I was younger, that's an environmental problem. That's a lifestyle problem. And that means that health problems are on the horizon. It doesn't mean they're going to be happening right now. It means they're going to be happening down the road, right? Because of this system right here. If you are not bringing melanin back into the system, into all of the internal parts of your body, eventually they start breaking down. Sphincters are one of the sphincter that I've noticed that has the most sensitivity to this is the esophageal sphincter. the one that's right here, right at the top of the stomach. And the reason for that is it should be exposed a lot to sunlight. That sphincter requires a lot of melanin restoration, because most people should be able to tan their neck and their face very readily. Like, not too many people walk around fully covered in their face, but that's the one that's the most sensitive. So if you stop going outside all of a sudden, well, now your head and your face don't get any tan anymore, right? And so now you're not replenishing the melanin. So let me explain a little bit how you replenish melanin in your internal workings, right? Number one, you need sunlight to create the melanin on your exterior, right? Now, the degree to that gets made is going to be individual. Like, for example, I have more equatorial mitochondria, so I tan a lot easier. I get darker on my surfaces. That's actually a disadvantage for me living in the northern hemisphere, because I don't want my melanin on the outside. I want it inside, right? So I make a lot of it and it stays on the outside for a lot longer. So I need to make an excess of it. And then I need to be even more diligent about light at night, meaning all visible light and all non-visible light. As much of it as possible needs to go away at night. Why? Because your body, your brain, and your nervous system make electricity. What electricity is another form of light, right? Electricity is another form of light. So when there's no light on your outside, the melanin migrates inside because the light is on the inside of your body now. Except when you keep lights on at night or Wi-Fi on at night, now the body senses, oh, there's still light on outside. So the melanin stays on the outside of the surface and never migrates back in. That's why it's important to have darkness at night to continue this remelanation process. Now, you, for example, you have an advantage. When you create melanin on the outside, you don't need as much darkness to move that melanin internally. It moves very easily for you because you have a haplotype that's more northern. It's been facilitated for you. Let's put it that way, right? So whenever you make any color on your skin, within a couple of weeks, it's already back inside of you. But that's a good thing. That's a thing that's going to allow you to survive in a more northern environment. Anytime you get any UV light, you collect it, you put it on your surface, and almost immediately it moves in. For somebody like
I
me,
tan very
it takes
easily,
longer.
and it's I never burned.
Right. Yeah. And not only do you tan very easily, but you don't just continually get darker, right? Like you get to a certain color, and then no matter how much more sun you get, you kind of stay at that color. It's because you're moving melanin internally very easily. For me, it's the opposite. The more sun I get, the darker I get. Like there's usually a point where I don't get darker, but it's very dark. It takes a long time to get to that stage where I'm about as dark as I'm going to get. It takes a couple months, to tell you the truth. It's because my melanin doesn't move inside nearly as fast. And that's a genetic mitochondrial lineage type of thing, right? So that's what I'm saying. I am more sensitive to these types of things if I live in a northern environment, whereas a Caucasian or northern environment, my mitochondrial haplotype, they won't be nearly as sensitive to these things as long as they get some UV light stimulation.
And can we somehow improve that with food? And before I carry on, I just want to highlight non-visible light is all the Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and everything that we have around us. So in case somebody wonders what you were talking about, like, what do you mean? I switched the lights off. What other light do you mean? So can we enhance our ability to get this melanin in with any nutritional strategies?
The melanin moving in probably won't be enhanced by any nutritional strategies, but in terms of digestion, right? Because this is a digestion episode, but all of this is very important to understand. It comes first before digestion, right? So a couple things, right? Melanin is also responsible for mitochondria doing work, right? Because it holds an electrical charge. That work, the thing that we're trying to cultivate from digestion, is making nucleotides, making products, right? Making protein chains, making all of these things, right? So the big thing that separates us from our nearest relative is that we have big ass brains, really big brains, and they take up a lot of energy, right? So the nutrients that you want to essentially keep rolling, right? So let's put it this way. Say you do have a mild demyelination effect, and you have a little bit of too much gut permeability. You could interpret this as leaky gut, right? Like, because a lot of people go to the doctor because they're having gut problems. They get tested for SIBO. They get tested for all the bacteria stuff. It comes back kind of normal, but they still have gut problems. And then the doctor just says, "Oh, you have leaky gut," right? And so then they give them all kinds of like supplements and things of that nature, and nothing really happens. The thing is, there are foods that you should bias when you have a quote slightly open permeability of gut. The one that I opened with is anything that has gelatin type structures in them, right? Collagen, and I'm not talking about the scoops that you get in the thing. They kind of work, but you would need to take a lot of them. It's way more effective if you do stews, like bone broth
It's
stews.
probably, if you
And
come from older Europe, you might even find it at your grandma's house. Like just a couple of days ago, I was talking to one of my friends, and this is how we stored food over winter. We had no fridge. And he was like, "What do you mean no fridge?" I'm like, I'm not that old. I just come from very old country that was like Soviet Union kind of setup. And to store any kind of animal products, you had to either salt them very, very harsh or turn them into gelatin type of food and store it in glass containers over winter.
Yeah. And what do, now listen to what you just said. Winter, right? No sunlight, very cold. You're not getting UV stimulation. It's everything that a synthetic environment is right now. I am not getting UV stimulation. Well, actually, I kind of lied. I have my UV light, but if I didn't have these special lights on, I wouldn't be getting any UV stimulation. There wouldn't be any sunlight coming through the windows that gets filtered, and my body stays at a constant temperature. That is what surviving in a Northern European country in the winter means. What do the foods all have there? Lots of gelatin structures. That's the way they preserve them. That's what keeps your gut moving correctly. And then the other things that are going to be helpful for that is a lot of DHA and a lot of, because see, animal products, grass-fed animal products will have DHA. They just don't have a lot of it. And when you're interacting in the modern world, DHA has a bigger propensity to get destroyed or oxidized. So you need more of it if you live in a high-tech world than you do in an old-tech world. But nonetheless, the foods that you want to focus on are animal products in nature, especially fattier, gelatinous, tendon, ligament type things that you make stews out of and things of that nature. Those would be incredibly valuable to keep the gut running correctly in a low sunlight environment or lifestyle. And then another thing, the nutrients that come from seafood, selenium, iodine, copper, zinc, all of these are crucial to keep the body running correctly. Copper, for example, plays a huge role in bone growth and repair. And it also plays a huge role in the mitochondria for creating water at cytochrome 4. So copper is crucial and here's another thing. Copper, right? I talk about it coming mainly from seafoods and stuff like that, like oysters, but they didn't always have to come from there. They came from pasture raised, grass fed whole milk, right? Whole milk. I'm sure that you drank whole milk when you were younger. It's yellow.
I stopped drinking milk when I
white.
moved to UK. So that wasn't
Right.
just younger. It was pretty much
Even too long ago. Yeah.
very
That
long
wasn't too
time
long
ago.
ago. Right. So, yeah. So the milk, raw milk that's not pasteurized or any of that is yellow. Why is it yellow? Is because it has things like lots of copper in it. It has lots of copper in it, and which gives it almost like a yellowish tint. It has a lot of vitamin A in it. Those types of foods have all the raw nutrients that I just described, just like seafood. The problem is it's way harder to get raw pasteurized milk than it is to get seafood.
And
Like
it
just right
tastes
now, like
completely
if you
different than milk from shop. It's just night and day.
yeah. Yeah. So those are the types of things. Animal products will be higher on the hierarchy if you're losing sunlight. So, okay, going into the winter, most people should venture towards more animal-based products. It doesn't mean you can't eat rice or potatoes and things of that nature. It means that those should start to be phased to a lower degree and more animal products to a higher degree in the wintertime, or if you're going to be spending months indoors, right? Or maybe that's just your job. You spend all your time indoors.
Is there some things that somebody who doesn't like seafood and any animal products that they can do about this to get these nutrients?
Yeah, don't live in a low sunlight lifestyle. I'm
Okay.
being serious.
Move to
If you
Mexico,
are already
Spain,
running in,
places like that.
yeah, if you're already running into these issues and you're plant-based, you're not going to fix it with a supplement. You're not going to fix it. You can fix it with a dietary change, like I just described, because the dietary change now starts to coordinate with the outside environment that you're experiencing. Or you can change the outside environment if you don't want to change the inside environment, right? What you're putting in your mouth, right? So that is what, unfortunately, that is what will happen eventually if you live a low sunlight life and you eat a high sunlight diet, right? You have to change one or the other. You can't not do that, right? There won't be anything that you can continue to take or anything like that.
And I don't know from your experience, but from my
you could,
experience, I see if they do that, their body starts to kind of slowly give in year by year. Usually starts with sexual health, low sex drive, then muscular health, and so on and so forth.
yeah, it won't happen all at once, right? Like there will be signs that come, right? Like, but they won't associate it with what I just described. That's the problem. Like 2 years later, they're like, man, I got to do something, right? And then they eventually either change their diet, or some of them get lucky and they move to a high sunlight environment and they continue to eat the same. And they're like, oh, everything kind of got fixed. So they accidentally change one or the other, right? Or not even accidentally. They either eventually capitulate and change their diet, which is often what happens. And another thing that will change there, right? So here's a heads up. Your hair will change first if you stay on a vegan diet and a low sunlight environment. Why? Because you're continually giving the body nutrients for growth, but you're not giving it any more melanin because you're lacking sunlight. Your hair will turn white or gray faster if you continue to eat a high sunlight diet and a low sunlight environment. This is a mammal adaptation. That's how I know this happens. This happens to every single mammal that stays alive during the winter. They can't, again, they can't change what they eat. For example, a hare or a rabbit, it still has to eat, vegetation, right? The problem is it has to eat it year round, right? It can't change to an animal-based diet. But the sun goes away in the winter. What's the first thing that changes? Their hair. Their hair and their eyes changes color because it's an adaptation to low sunlight environment with a high vegetation diet still. So if you're vegan, one of the very first signs, because this happens quickly, it happens within a month. If you are low enough in sunlight and high enough in a high sunlight food environment, then you will notice hair changes quickly. You'll get a little bit grayer, beard, hair, etc. Your eyes might even get a little bit lighter, things of that nature. Those will be the very first signs on the surface.
So it's not that your gut is responsible just for digestion. It can literally lead to you getting gray hair.
Yeah. Because it's all one system, right? Your skin, your brain, and your gut are all trying to get on the same page to always adapt to the environment that you're sensing.
Right. I think on that bombshell, I'm going to let you off. Appreciate your time as usual. It's been very informative, and I'll see you next video.
Awesome. Thank you.